destination was only part of this. The journey was clearly a part of this as well. And one of the things I remember loving was rest stops, turnpike stops. And I was actually I had dinner the other day with two of my classmates. We were talking about the need to do this at I just had my Yale reunion class of 71. And two of my friends, both of whiff and poofs, one of them the pitch pipe, were from Merrick, Long Island. I grew up in Massapequa, Long Island. And I said, let's meet at Pastrami King. And we did this. And while we were there, I asked Norm and Jeff where they went on their family vacations, because we only went to one place. We went to Pennsylvania Dutch Country every summer. That's what we did over and over and over and over again. And so in the process of talking about this with Norm, he told me a story that they would go a different kind of vacation. They went to the Neveling, which was in the Jewish Catskills. So they would go to the Neveling, very different kind of vacation. But he said at one point they stopped at the New York State Thruways rest stop, and he said he was around 8 or 9 years old, and there was a milk machine. Back when people drank milk, there was a milk machine that for a quarter you get a little carton of milk. So he pressed a chocolate milk button, and somewhat disgustingly, it didn't come out. And so he left. So Norm said, I went over, pressed the button, and out it came. He said, so I pressed the button again, and another one came down. He said, I did it 12 times. I had a dozen cartons of milk. It was the day of the milk bonanza. It was like winning at Vegas for them. So the rest stops, in other words, were part of the fun. So we brought along a Howard Johnson's plastic bag, an ashtray from the Pennsylvania Turnpike, back when people loved roads. And if you didn't get to go on vacation, you stayed home and waited for the Good Humor truck.
And that was yours, right?
This was mine. These are things we bought later on. That was mine, and that's, I don't know, mid-50s, I think. Mm-hmm. So anyway, we happened to be in Pennsylvania. I still drag my wife. She's a good sport. We go to Pennsylvania Dutch Country. I drag Basie there. We drag Basie there when he was little. And I still love it. So we were just, knowing about this exhibit, we were sort of snooping around. We went to a couple of antiques. We didn't go crazy, but one of the things I found was this 45 record, which 1962, a wonderful Gut, where you can listen to somebody with a Doris Day-like voice singing you and teaching you Pennsylvania Dutch phrases for the young couple who were out sparking. So anyway, there's that. And thinking about this, I was trying to organize my thoughts a little bit and think about where did we stop. So, and I mean, the two questions I was sort of asking myself, where did we stop, where did we go, and why? Mm-hmm. And why was it that my parents loved going to Pennsylvania Dutch Country so much we went there every year? It wasn't simply lack of imagination, it may have been some of that. So thinking about why we went places and what places we went to helped me to think about why we went there. And on the way to Pennsylvania Dutch Country, we always stopped in Philadelphia. And we almost always did something historical. So I remember going to Valley Forge, and this is sort of help explain some of these things. So one of the places, we stopped there because it was historic in the Revolution. We saw the Liberty Bell. So this was something, again, from my childhood that I've had. The Ersatz Declaration of Independence, aged perfectly. So it looks very
authentic. People still think it's 18th century every year.
Authentic. By the way, this is, I can say this, right? So one of my favorite professors at Yale as a history student was Ed Morgan, who taught colonial history. And at one point he stopped to tell us a little bit about 18th century handwriting, 18th century script, and how to recognize it. And one of the letters that they used was the thaw, which was a TH sound. And so when you go to, especially in the 50s, you go to places and see the thaw was shaped like a Y. So you still go to places saying ye old
Ye.
candy store.
Yeah.
Well, it was never ye. A Y was pronounced with a TH. It was the. So that was one of the things I'm most indebted to Ed Morgan for teaching me. There's no such thing as ye old curiosity shop. It's the. So anyway, getting back to Ersatz language and Ersatz documents, I remember buying this at Valley Forge. Now there's that. Hopefully that's useful. Another historic place that we went just once, and that was when my brother is 12 years younger than I am. So it must have been the late 60s. So here's a souvenir deck of cards from Williamsburg.
Oh, nice.
So is that
Yeah.
useful?
Yes.
Okay. Another place I remember we passed, not because it was historic, but just it was a delightful small town, and still is, was New Hope in Bucks County. And there was a little creek running through it, and it was just pleasant. So this was another thing from my childhood that we bought these. I have no idea why. Why would you want this? I don't know, but there it is, New Hope, Pennsylvania. So again, thinking about this, history was always a little part of this. So it was sort of educational tourism, historical tourism. Another part of this was the food, was always the food. And my parents loved the food down there. The food's fabulous. It's still really good. And one of the things that I realized from thinking about this is that Pennsylvania Dutch country was perfect in two ways. It was perfect because it was different. It was clearly different. You had people who actually, even to this day, a few of them speak German. And they look different. It was a kind of cultural tourism. Interesting others, different and yet familiar. Not that different. The food you could have, you could have scrapple. Scrapple is something you usually only get in certain parts of the country, and that's one of them. And on the other hand, fried chicken, apple pie, all those things. You could get shoe fly pie, which was one of the big things down there. But it wasn't that different. It wasn't exotic. It was familiar but different. So familiar but different. And the other thing was, you felt like you really were someplace, you were away. I think that quality of being away is really important. And yet, not that far. It's only outside of Philadelphia, so you didn't have to drive for a long, long time. So I think those two things had great appeal. So history was a great attraction. Food was a great attraction. And the place that one of the things that drew us there, and I think drew us there when Basie was little, was the food, a kind of food tourism, and also this, in my childhood more so than yours, I think, Hershey, Pennsylvania. It was chocolate, it was food, and yet it was fun. It was, now there's like a big Hershey land that was not there when I was a kid.
But was there when I was a kid.
Yes.
We went to it.
Yeah. And so this is from Basie's childhood.
Nice.
So there we go, if that's useful. And there are some other things, I'll get them out now. I think these were from your childhood as well, little Hershey magnets. It's gotten, it was always commercialized. I don't know if it even makes sense to say it's more commercialized now, but there's a big fun zone now with rides and splash parks and everything. The big attraction when I was a kid, other than the chocolate, which was a huge attraction, you got to see how it was really made. You can still see how it's made now in their chocolate park or chocolate world. They call it Chocolate World.
Yeah.
And there's a similar place, by the way, in England, in Cadbury, because I've been there. And I love
Bourneville?
it. In Bourneville, in England.
Can't go wrong.
But so you can see how it's made now, but it's a little bit more like Disney from the World's Fair.
It's a ride.
It's a ride, and you see animated characters, animatronics, and all that. But then you went to the factory, which is across the street from what they have now, and you saw them actually making chocolate. And this is indelibly imprinted on my mind: a Olympic-sized swimming pool room of chocolate being stirred.
This is pre-Willy Wonka.
Pre-Willy Wonka,
So,
yes. So
between that and helmet
scary.
safety, not surprising that
So anyway,
longer allowed to do
I
that,
think that's
but
why they stopped. You
I'm
couldn't,
sure.
you couldn't go through the
I'm sure it's
actual
legal.
yeah, well, I would
factory.
think,
You had to
yeah.
have the ride instead.
So that was a huge attraction. So food, history, fun, and one of the things that was most fun wherever we went, of course, there were the motels, and I have some postcards, and that was something because most people didn't have swimming pools, and so going to a motel with a swimming pool, it was huge, and it's the summertime, so that was big. The other thing that we always did, and still like, miniature golf. So if it's useful at all, I brought this. This is actually one of my favorite books. It's a history of miniature golf with, of course, a miniature golf cover. So is that useful?
We'll take it for now. We may not
Okay.
use it in the exhibit, but
Gotcha.
we may have some miniature golf material come in for all we know, so.
And if you would like, this is just a little scorecard from Village Greens.
Sure.
It's been there forever. That's the pencil that goes with
All
it.
right.
'Cause-
You can see we're complete.
Mary, are you kidding?
So historical tourism, cultural tourism, food and fun was what I was coming up with. But maybe I've blathered on for. Would you like to ask something
Jay,
more?
now what's over here?
Okay, well, these are things that are, this I'm sure has been in print and hasn't changed for a long time. I'm pretty sure all three of these things came from when we went there. And I think that's the first place maybe they're earlier.
These look older than my childhood.
Okay, so maybe 70s.
These look like they're from the 70s, I would have thought, or early 80s. No, 1970.
So those are from Hershey.
Okay, good.
One's a little recipe booklet, one's, the story of how chocolate is made and just the welcome. When we didn't go that far and wanted just a day trip, especially in the early 60s, it's from 1960, went to Freedom Land. Have you heard of Freedom
No,
Land?
where was that?
Freedom Land was in the South Bronx, where now Co-op City is.
Oh,
So it was on a marshy bunch of land that nobody wanted. Margaret Ann, you remember this? Did you ever go?
No.
Okay, you're too young.
She's like, I am.
Freedom Land was great, and so this was history tourism because they had an exhibit for the Chicago Fire, the Great Plains. So it was history, hence Freedom Land is the story of the country. But the big attraction was that they had star performers. And this is before the age of rock and roll. This is early 60s, before the Beatles, before all of that. So they had big bands. Count Basie would perform there.
Oh.
The one that I remember was Xavier Cugat.
yeah.
Anybody? Xavier Cugat?
Yeah.
Okay. Xavier Cugat, and I must have been no more than about eight years old. I was small enough to get right up to the front of the stage, and I looked up, and there was Abbey Lane, who was his singer.
Oh,
And
very good
Abbey
singer.
Lane was one of the great sultry, singers of the era. And I've always loved that kind of Latin jazz sound, big band sound.
Yeah.
So Freedom Land, that's why I remember
Now, did you
it.
stay at the hotel, Jay, when you would go with your family, or was it just always
This was a day trip.
It was always a day trip.
Because it was the
okay.
Bronx, so it wasn't
Okay.
that far. So I don't remember staying at hotels for
Okay.
that. But if you, back to being in the car. So if you were going on the longest ride, like to the Catskills, you could play car bingo.
And I definitely played that as a little kid.
Yeah.
So this is something, to be truthful, that I think we bought later, but I do remember playing it then.
And it's either a old replica or it's just old, because I mean Rambler is on here, and it's at least from the 60s. Yeah, pretty fun.
So there's that.
So you didn't have your Game Boy face that you had?
No,
You had
I did
bingo?
not. I was a pretty old-fashioned little kid. Shocking.
Would you like to turn to Basie now and ask him about it? Because we could,
I
I'll just
don't
keep going.
have a lot.
Well, we'll go through all the
We'll go through your
stuff.
material.
So here is I don't know why I have this, because I saved everything even then. So this is just a booklet of all the Holiday Inns across the country.
Good.
And that's where we stayed almost always, was in a Holiday Inn. It was just the perfect place for families. It was a reliable chain. You didn't have to worry about anything. It was very affordable. Holiday Inn was the place. And I think we almost always stayed in Holiday Inns.
So they usually had a color TV, which that was a big deal when I was little, because we didn't have one at home yet. At a Holiday Inn, they usually had a pool, and then they usually had a restaurant, and they might have had air conditioning, right?
I think so.
So that would have made it like the perfect place to stay.
as with hotels in the 20s, where people got to experience certain amenities that they might not have had at home.
Right.
Same thing was true in the 50s and 60s.
And then they had some signature dishes. They had a clam roll sandwich. And
No,
they had-
that's Howard Johnson.
Oh, that's Howard Johnson's, okay. And then, but then they had, what did Holiday Inn have? Did
I
they
don't
have-
remember signature
They
dishes.
didn't have anything signature?
I don't think
Okay.
so.
you
Howard
just had-
Johnson's had the clam
Howard
rolls.
Johnson's had the clam roll?
Yeah.
Okay.
The ice cream, the
And the
X
ice
number of
creams.
flavors, whatever
And
it
the
was.
ice cream.
They also had their own candy bars, which, by the way, were delicious. They made a fudge bar, which was fabulous.
I'm noticing a chocolate thread here.
Well, there is a chocolate.
Not my friend.
Not as, yeah. So anyway, so Holiday Inns, we always stayed at, and if we didn't, as I remember, we would stay in Lancaster, which is the small city near Pennsylvania Dutch country. And I remember actually, so it wasn't just sort of a rural country-ish thing, but we often stayed in the city. It was a really nice small city. They had a museum we used to go to, I think it's still there, a self-guided tour of newspaper history. That was in Lancaster. And so it's still a nice place. We go to the used bookstore there, and, various things, but we always had, there was an urban part of the vacation, even though we didn't, so we occasionally stayed there. I remember later on trying to recreate the kind of scale of the old Holiday Inns, that kind of nice motel where you could pull right up to the door. That was one of the great attractions. You pull right up to your front door. You just go in. And it was just great for the family on the move. And it's harder to find that now because the chains tend to have 2 or 3 stories. It's not the same. They're not as nice. They're not as welcoming. Those old Holiday Inns had at least the illusion of being mom and pop kind of places. So when Basie was little, I went out of my way to go through the AAA guide. Online, you can't find these things as easily. There aren't good websites to find what I'm looking for, which is a mom and pop kind of place. So, but I used to be, there used to be some. So I don't know if that's
Great.
useful.
Oh,
There's
absolutely.
that.
That's a recognizable, good name. That'll be a good exhibit.
So when Basie was young, I would look for these sort of old places with a nice neon sign, something that looked homey and mom and pop-ish in the
And
place.
very 1950s. I mean,
And honestly, very
ignored the
1950s.
passage of time for the last 40 years.
Right. Well, I think that was even true when I was little, and your grandparents were in charge. But I think part of it for them was looking not only for someplace away but close, different but not too different. They were also, I think, not just looking for historical tourism, but looking for something old-fashioned that would remind them of their childhood. And I think Pennsylvania Dutch country did that for them, because they both grew up in upstate New York, and they were looking for something a little bit more country-ish, something where it was...
Well, that's a very agricultural region, lots and lots of farms, which is true of
Yeah.
their area.
Exactly, and it had a small town feel, so I was looking to recreate that when he was little. And I remember one of the places we stayed in, couldn't remember the name. It was the Congress Motor,
Congress Motel?
Congress Motel or the
Or
Congress Inn.
Congress Inn.
I think it was the Congress Inn, and it was shaped. Their main building was shaped like Congress. I don't know. I think it's actually still there, maybe.
And where's that?
It was on the main drag, which was Route 30, which took you through. There were 2 main roads. There was 240 and Route 30, which went from Philadelphia to. Both of these roads were pikes originally that took you from Philly to Lancaster, and Route 30 was the main one back then, and that's where we often stayed. There was the Cherry Inn, Cherry something. Remember that? And there was the Canadiana Motel for visiting Canadians. They had a Canadian flag. Those are some of the ones I remembered. Fitting with the Holiday Inn, here's a postcard with the pool featured prominently always.
And where is that one?
This one's actually in North Carolina because I think I bought that one.
This is neat because you keep the little one.
Yeah,
and
how
you
great
send
is
the
that?
It's a great idea, actually.
So these, some of these are original. They're all originals, but some I bought. I didn't just keep. These 2 are of the place that's been there the longest. And I think most of this is a phenomenon of the post-war. You know, so the oldest place that I could find, because knowing that you guys were doing this time I asked people, it's like, when did this place start? When did it first open? So the place I remember that I think has been there the longest for the tourist landscape is Dutch Haven, which has a little windmill.
Oh, that's great. That's a real,
Is that fun?
I love the windmill. It's perfect.
And it opened in
1946, so it's absolutely perfect.
Oh.
I wrote down who opened it. It was a guy named Roy Weaver, but I have this in my notes. And before that, it was called, hold on, where's my little piece of paper? Not that you need to know. I had it here a moment ago. Well, we'll find that. But before that, it was a gas station that sold hot dogs.
Okay.
So it was catered mostly to a local trade, and when Roy Weaver bought it in 46, he turned it into a tourist thing. Now, a little test here. Which of these is the older picture?
Wow. Good question. They both say Amish stuff. Let's see.
Yep, that's...
I guess I'm going to have to go with this one because it doesn't have the rocket in front of it. But I could be wrong.
Nope, you're absolutely right. This is the older one, and here's why I remembered it. Because on this one it simply says Shoe Fly Pies. The lettering's a little bit newer, I think, too. But on this one it says, "Ah, come on in." And that was something that the early tourist places all promoted. First of all, they had German writing, that fracture writing, and they had like this kind of German words. You always want to see a few of them. The things I remember most in the landscape were some German words here and there, and selling hex signs. You guys know about hex signs?
Yes, I know.
Right, so the hex signs were a big deal, and there were little places that sold hex signs everywhere. So the older sign was in German, or a kind of German. So here's two from Dutch Haven.
Good.
I think that's possibly useful. And here is one from the Willows, which is also an early motel.
Great.
And
Yeah, and then it says famous for Pennsylvania Dutch food. So
Well-
it gets the food angle in there.
well, and this one is also, and you might want to keep it with them, from Dutch Haven. Well, it says on the back, so you don't have to worry about it. But they may have been one of the first places to serve food family style, what they call family style, which is a long table where you had like 3 or 4 families to a table. And they served everything in big bowls, not individual. You know,
Right.
you had your individual plate, but it was, you know, you passed
took
the
whatever
bowls.
you wanted.
Yeah.
Took what you wanted. So that's still a big thing in Pennsylvania Dutch country, and it may be the Dutch Haven, which doesn't have a restaurant now, was one of the first ones to do it, and that's the postcard that
Nice.
proclaims that. And this is a postcard which it's an old postcard,
Yeah.
maybe from the 60s, but we just sent it to Basie. And I said, bring it with you. And so this is an old postcard of Good and Plenty Restaurant, which is one of the 2 favorites of our family. And I did write down actually here when that one opened, I think it was
1969 was
1969. Yeah, 69. And I'm going to get my notes.
So Casey, that's not you in the picture.
No, shocking. These are the notes.
Yes, here's the notes. I have notes. Yeah, so Good and Plenty was opened in 1969 by Chris and Dolly Lapp, L-A-P-P, which is one of the families that you see out there, you know, on many buildings. Weaver and Lapp are 2 sort of big names. So this is a postcard from Dutch Wonderland, which is a newer fun thing, but it opened in 1963. And I remember my little brother just loved that.
And I loved
It's got the rocket. Yeah, so.
and that still is open now, and was certainly a highlight of the trips when we would go when I was little. And I remember one of the special things about it was that it had a car ride that, you know, sort of these vintage cars that you could drive around this track, and they were sort of somehow pegged to the track, so you really couldn't go very far off, but you still could steer and accelerate and brake. And for someone who loved cars at an age far before you could drive, it was a very exciting thing.
Exactly.
So I
You
think,
guys want to sit down? We can do that.
actually, yeah, I wouldn't
Yeah.
mind.